Everyone, so we haven't done a boat in quite a while, so I thought we'd have another go at a boat. It's quite a good one for you to have a draw with and have a go at perspective. So this is a nice simple boat. There is a little bit of foreshortening in this boat. Now, foreshortening is when something is long and thin and is coming from the side, and you actually need to accentuate a little bit when you're drawing the front and the back of the boat. So you need to make this slightly bigger at the front and very slightly smaller at the back, and that gives the length. So it's when you've got something long and thin and it's at this angle. So there is a little bit that's a bit deceiving. So as you draw it out, if you draw it the same, it'll look short, fat and dumpy. So you've got to accentuate a little bit either side. So have a go at that. If you start with this angle and then work to get this angle in here, that works quite nicely. So I did it that way. Then I've drawn in the reflection, the little boy coming down. I've kept the rocks quite low, and then I've got where the lines in the sand are at the back. Take your time with the drawing. You want to try and get that right if you can. Okay, colours wise, I've mixed up some cobalt blue, a browny grey, so that is made with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, but there's more burnt sienna in the mix. I've got alizarin crimson neat, and I've got cerulean blue neat. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is come on and get some background. So we're coming round the boat. All the way down to the rocks. Over the reflection. If you can get around the buoy that's up in the air, you can come over the ropes and over the reflection of the buoy, that's fine. So just take your time getting this bit of water on and making sure you've covered where you need to cover. And I'm going to come in with some cobalt blue. So I'm going to keep it lighter towards the back. And you'll notice that I'm following the line of the beach as I'm coming on and doing this. Come carefully round the boat. You want to come up to your reflection. You can get around this white of the buoy as well. Again, you can come over the rocks, over the ropes. It's not the end of the world if you come over the buoy, because you can always just dab it out. So you're just getting that base on to start with. I'm going to dab a little bit into the grey and just run through just a little bit at the back. I'm just stroking this through with the round number 10. And then I'm going to do the same, just starting in here. This is going to give me a base to work to later. Just make sure you don't eliminate all of your blue. You don't have to get it all on either. I'm going to swap down to a number 6 and just come in now. So this I've dabbed in water, then I'm going into neat cerulean blue. I'm just looking at this reflection of the boat in the water. So it just breaks through a little bit. So it's not a pure still water reflection. So you've got those broken lines in there. And then give my brush a rinse, dab into the alizarin, and do the same for the bottom of the boat. So this is damp, but what I've done is I've waited to a point that it's not too wet, that it's going to run too much. And the fact that I'm using neat paint means it's not running very far at all. It's always a bit strange when you do the reflection before you do the boat, but it just works this way quite well. I'm going to pick up a bit of the grey. No, it's the browny grey. Just drop that in for that bit of shadow. And a bit of shadow along there as well. So I've now got some time just to add a few little bit more bits of the brown. It's a browny grey. That bit where you just come through a little bit here works really nicely to break the surface and show that it's a reflection. You're not worrying about rocks or anything at this stage, it's just getting this base in. I'm just going to dip back into the cerulean blue, just run a little bit of that, not a lot, but just a little bit, just towards this deeper bit of water, just at the back, just so I've got a bit of variation. And I'm going to dab back into the grey, just bring a bit through this back section, which I haven't touched. I'm going to bring a bit more blue through here as well in a minute. If this happens, so I've just come onto the boat just where I don't want it to, just get a bit of kitchen towel, dab it off. It's either something you can sort when it's dry, or just grab it straight away if it's not in a full wet and wet area. So I'm just popping a little bit of the grey on first of all. Then I'm going to come back in with a little bit more of the blue, because I need this area to be darker, a darker sort of mix, but then I'm going to pop a bit of salt on that bit at the back, just to start to create that texture. It's all about creating that texture easier. Okay, so this is just standard tabled salt, and you're going to sprinkle. You can take some into this top section if you want. I'm going to try to focus it on this middle bit, because that's where I can see all the texture in the sand. So I'm being quite careful about where I'm popping it. Some of it will inevitably go in that top section, but I'm trying my best. And then I'm just going to let that do its thing, soak up, and then I can dry it off properly. Okay? Okay, so that's nice and dry now. So I just want you to rub this salt off. Take your time to get it off, otherwise if you come on with anything else it will do the same effect. It's just added enough texture in that background, it's quite nice. Okay, so I'm just going to dab into a little bit of the alizarin crimson with a fair amount of water. So come into here. So the back of the boat has got some shadow, but it's actually quite a pinky shadow. So I'm coming in with this. Because we've got this already in the picture, it works quite nicely. So that's just accentuating that side. It's going to run a little bit just up here as well. Then if I get my number 6 and just with a wet brush just come in and just soften that in totally, and then soften that under there, so it's just giving that little hint of shadow. Then I can come in and do the bottom bit of the boat. So obviously this is a lot darker, alizarin crimson now. If you can see the tip of your brush, it makes it much easier to see the line. Make sure you load your brush up. Nothing worse than it looking really dry and scratchy. And do a nice stroke. It's a bit lighter as you get towards, as the paint's wearing, as you get towards that edge. So get the base in. Get your nice line. I'm going to come in with some of the grey. With a picture like this, it's always quite nice to try and use the same colours. It's a really simple picture, but it works really nicely. And then with a clean wet brush or slightly damp, I just want you to just come and soften in this edge, just so you get that lighter effect. You can pull some of the colour. You're just basically wanting that lighter effect. I've got some neat indigo here on my palette as well, just so that I get these really nice darks. I'm going to come in with a little bit of neat indigo. I'm going to use some of the indigo on the rocks, so it's going to tie in quite nicely on the picture. So this is my number 6. I'm just coming along, because you really need this nice dark in the picture. Just whilst it's still damp, you can do this bit. It's run quite a lot at this end, so if with a nearly dry brush you can just push some of it back. Just so you don't lose that lovely light at the end. Okay, I'm going to dry that bit off. Okay, so I've dried that off. I've also touched into this top with a little bit of the alizarin crimson, just to give it that colour. And I'm going to come now onto this side of the boat. So I'm going to put a tiny bit of water on this. So this is just my round number 10, adding a bit of water because it's a bigger area. I'm nearly out of cerulean blue, so I'm going into the tube. Remember again, you see the tip of your brush, you'll get a nice edge. Don't be afraid to turn your paper around so you can always see the tip and you can get that nice edge. That little bit of water just allows you that bit more time to do this section. Remember, you've got that white bit in between, so you don't want to get that wet. Keep that dry. in a tiny bit of water. Okay, so I just finished painting that little bit there and I've just let it dry, so it was just literally the cerulean blue going on there. I'm now going to pick up a little bit of grey on my brush, or the grey brown, and just come down this side. Don't want it to be too dark, so I'm just rinsing a little bit off my brush. You want to see the colour underneath still. I'm just coming down this edge. So I can lift some of that out and just spread this across that section. It should just give you that nice definite shadow on the edge. If you want to accentuate that shadow a little bit more, then just add a little bit more paint towards that edge there. Bring a bit there as well, so that's just a little bit more of the brown colour. I'm going to do the similar on this boy, so just pick out a little bit of shadow. So you see I'm coming very carefully around the edge, and then with a wet brush I can come in and touch the paint so it's not going too far. I'm just going to dab into a tiny amount of the rose colour, because I think it's got a little bit of that reflecting on it as well. So let's pick that nicely. I'm just going to pop a little bit just to help accentuate the reflection on the ground as well. I'm just softening that in a little bit because I don't want it to be too obvious, but I want it to be there. And take a little bit of the grey, just run a tiny bit of that just on that bottom of the white there. That's going to help to accentuate that white edge. Then again, just soften that in with a damp brush, so it's just on that edge. I'm just going to dry that off. I've picked up a little bit more of the alizarin crimson, and I'm just going to pop in these ropes. I'm just going to pop the line just on the ground there as well. So this, I'm using my round number 6, but I've got quite a good point on this, so I can get away with it. You could use a thinner one if you want. So this is again a little bit of the browny grey, just dropping that through to create a bit of shadow. Just on that one side. Okay, I'm going to come into the rocks. I'm just going to dry that off to make sure it's dry. Okay, so I'm going to work my way sort of from the back here, and the trick with rocks, so this is just pretty much neat sepia, is to make sure you don't end up with what looks like seals on the beach or whales. So you want to have them in proportion. You want the bottom bit to be quite smooth and flat and the top bit to be quite rocky. So I'm just popping a few in. You can do these one at a time. I'm going to dip into a tiny bit of indigo as well, because that will just darken places. So I'm just dropping that in, using my number 6. So they're nice and dark, and then with a wet brush you're going to touch the bottom edge, and that just grounds the rock. So I'm just sweeping a little bit of water. Now the trick is they need to be the right wetness to do this. So if it's too wet, it'll run too far and you'll extend your rock. If it's not wet enough, it won't run at all and it won't ground the rock, it'll look like it's floating. So it takes a little bit of practice. Got a little one here. You don't need to put them all in. Just a few works quite nicely. So I'm just working in stages, doing a few, then softening in. I'm going to show you this type of rock in a second, because this is a little bit different. So it's not got what I would class as a smooth bottom. I'm going to show you what to do with that one. So again, I'm adding a little bit of indigo. So we've got my sepia down, now adding a bit of indigo in, just to darken it up in places. And then I'm just going to touch in with a little bit of water. So I'm always going horizontal with the water, touching in, and then can you see I'm just grabbing little bits horizontally on these ones, so it still softens and grounds it, and it gives that sense of a reflection. All these little bits now that you're coming in with over the actual reflection are essential for it to make it feel like it's a reflection. Without that, it doesn't feel like it's the surface of anything. So all these little bits, absolutely essential. Really add to it. I always say try not to think about it too much. You have to think about it, but if you pause too much and think about it, it ends up really looking quite uniform and not random enough. So use a picture as a guide and get them in. So again, touching either side. With the bigger ones, touching more than one place. So come in that side there. And you'll see that that's starting to look like the surface of water. Okay, big rock here. The bigger the rocks as you come to the foreground, the more it'll give a sense of distance as well. So if you try to keep these for this area, it will work much better. My indigo. Nice and strong. If they look too wet, you've got to wait a minute before you start to pull them out, otherwise it will just flow too much. You can take a few little bits of the browny grey on, so what I'm doing now is just accentuating the sand a little bit. These sand areas. Wet brush, softening. So you don't have to hit everywhere, but you do want it to feel grounded. So what I'm creating now is some extra bits of surface on the sand there. Just do a few more here. Just making sure that I hit enough places that it doesn't look too harsh. Just going to come at the top section there as well. Okay, bit of water, touching on these ones now. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so we're going to come onto these rocks at the front now. Get a basin for those. I'm just popping a little bit of water. Then I'm going to come in with sepia. So you're just getting the shape in at this stage. Then I can come in with a bit of indigo into that sepia. Try to get it as dark as you can at this stage. You come in a bit later, but the darkness now does help. So I'm not covering the whole thing with the indigo, but I'm just popping a little bit in as I come along. I'm also going to just take up a little bit of the last bit of alizarin crimson on my palette and just dab that in. Now I've got a little bit of plastic card and I can just start to draw in some of these rock shapes. So if I indent with the corner, then that means that I'm getting the paint to flow into the paper, so it's going to give it a darker line. So you can use this for any craggy bits, any definition between the rocks. Do not outline. So this is all about just getting those darker lines in. The other thing you can do is scrape the rock. So if you scrape, you pull in the paint, and you'll have lighter areas and darker areas. That works quite nicely to create that sort of rock face. So I'm just pulling along. If you can get a bit of a lighter edge next to the darker crag, even better, because that will work really nicely. It's not always that easy to do that. It's more of a random process. But already they're looking quite rock-like. So it's just following the shape of the rock and moving that paint a little bit. If it flows straight back, then you just need to leave it a minute or two. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. So I've added another rock here, a rock here, a rock here, and a rock here. Now the reason I've done that is because I want to take the focus away from a straight line of rocks. What this does is just sweep that round. It sweeps your eye round towards the boat, and it gives that foreground a bit more interest. So I want to darken these rocks now, and I want them to look rock-like. So what I'm doing is I'm just getting some dark sepia and indigo onto my palette knife. Now it's never easy to do this with watercolour because you want it to be fairly thick to use a palette knife, but you can do it and it is quite effective. So I'm just following the shape of the rocks. Don't eliminate every bit of the light. So I'll pop some onto here, and you can scrape and you can use it quite flat. So you can use a combination. So if I come in here and use it quite flat and then pull it down, I'm getting a dark edge. And I can scrape over. It can be any palette knife. You could use your piece of plastic if you wanted to as well. It's just that flatness creates that rock effect. If you come on with a brush, it's not quite the same. So I'm sort of dipping the palette knife in. Fairly thick colour, but there is some water in it, and it's just helping to accentuate those dark areas. It'll also hit the paper and pull texture quite nicely. That's just a nice bit of texture. So it's adding a little bit extra to these rocks. making them look like they're more in the foreground. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. And that's pretty much it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you next week. Bye.